Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of the Gateway Spotlight series. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, and I'm really excited about today's topic. We're talking about to go or not to go, and the top decision factors for education abroad programs in 2022. So if you're new to this series, the Gateway Spotlight is a bi-weekly live interview show designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next generation initiatives, and emerging trends and innovative thinkers in international higher education community. Today's episode is sponsored by SafeTure. It offers a complete cloud-based platform designed to manage employee safety and risk crisis management. It's the optimal tool to always be up to date on the security situation for individuals and facilities. And it's already used by 3,800 companies and organizations worldwide. Through world-leading technology and innovative solutions, SafeTure protects what matters most, your employees and your students. Thank you so much to SafeTure for sponsoring this episode. Let's dive in. I'm really excited to bring on some resident experts and thought leaders on the subject matter. And so just to give you a summary of this subject matter and why we decided to bring this topic forward, is that sands are constantly shifting in global mobility right now, especially based on the global health crisis and more recently, more security related issues, especially in Eastern Europe. And so making that go, no-go decision about study abroad programs can feel like throwing darts while blindfolded. You don't really know what you're going to hit and if you're even on the right track. And so because of this, education abroad administrators often lack the confidence or a solid framework to make these challenging decisions. So in this episode today, we're talking with Kyle Rausch, Terrence Miller, and Magnus Hultman on the Big 12, what I like to call the Big 12, questions every study abroad professional should ask and answer when making the go, no-go decision for summer programs and beyond. So welcome everyone to the conversation. So happy to have you all here. Feel free to unmute yourself so we can get this conversation going. And if you're watching as an audience member, please say hello in the chat and please add any questions you have or commentary that you would like to bring forward to the conversation as well. So, but to get this started, I'm going to bring this to you, Kyle. How did you and Terrence come up with this list of questions, what I'm calling the Big 12? But it's a list of 12 questions, and we are going to offer it as a resource over on Gateway website, and we'll also be emailing it out to everybody who's registered. So don't worry, you will get a copy of these. But how did you come up with this list of questions when you were brainstorming this?
Yeah, sure thing, Brooke. Thanks. So once the Department of State updated its methodology for setting travel advisory levels, I think many institutions quickly began to realize that relying perhaps solely on the Department of State's advisory levels as a way to make these decisions was much less helpful. It lost a lot of that nuance since they were focusing primarily on COVID-19. And so this list was really developed out of a need. I kept talking with colleagues throughout the field, and they were saying, how are you all navigating, making decisions about whether to send groups out? And so at Gateway, we saw a real need to come up with a framework to help institutions and organizations think through this decision process. And so the initial list started really with me just reflecting with my program leaders, my colleagues here. I work at University of Illinois at Chicago, and figuring out what our approach has been. And then we're very fortunate at Gateway to have several affiliates with years and years of experience. So we passed that list around, got further input to really solidify what we think is a strong framework of 12 decision factors, questions that colleagues can ask themselves as they're trying to make these complex decisions. And then the only other thing I want to add is that rather than being prescriptive, the aim of these decision factors really is to help institutions know the questions they should ask. So we're not giving you the answers. I want to put that up front and center. That's an important point to make, because I think what we have found through the pandemic is that every institution has such a different sense for their risk tolerance threshold. So I think this framework is really nice because it allows institutions to bring that back to their campus and mold it to fit their context.
Yeah, Kyle, you ended on the perfect note. Before you get to those 12, you need to do the cultural institutional review on how your institution is risk adverse or jumps into risk. What is your student-centered policies? As Brooke started this, there is nothing certain in the field of education abroad right now than uncertainty. And so each of us are grappling in our roles as education abroad professionals with these critical questions. And this webinar hopefully will tell you you're not alone. We're in the field came up with these 12 sort of prescriptive or benchmarks, I would call them. But the most important thing is to tap into those resources at your institution. Your general counsel, your health officer has now become the gateway, literally, through which study abroad programs are going or not going. And so the education of that health officer is really imperative at this time, as well as your risk manager, your insurance factors, et cetera. So even before you get into the 12, you need to know your culture at your institution in order for these 12 factors to really have impact.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate to everyone watching live or watching in the future to the recording, we'll have these in the show notes. So if you just go to the Gateway International website, you'll be able to find all the details there. So just want to make sure that you all recognize that we're not going to leave you empty-handed. So Terrence, you have a legal background, you're an attorney. Can you walk through a little bit about why, from even just a tactical reason, besides student safety, of course, that's our foremost concern with these things, but from a legal and risk management perspective, why is this type of rubric or framework important from that perspective?
Well, as we all know, Brooke, the field has been inundated with recent cases around duty of care. Each of our universities have a responsibility to exercise duty of care towards our faculty and students. That has to be reasonable and foreseeable. There's been a recent case in Rhode Island involving Rhode Island School of Design, where a lock on the door was seen as being reasonable and foreseeable. It involved a sexual assault case, and the universities having individual locks on bedroom doors was perceived to be within the university's duty of care. So each of us as education abroad professionals need to take this extremely seriously and operate within that framework of what is reasonable and what is foreseeable. And so as you go through the duty of care and then the due diligence, which is another case, Kyle, and maybe you want to talk about the Munson case in China, but those two cases really require us as educational abroad professionals to dive into this a little deeper, get travel policies that make sense, that are consistent, that are transparent to internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders.
Terrence, and just to add a little bit about that case Terrence just mentioned. So this was actually a case involving a high school group, but it actually has seemed to suggest that there may be precedent for higher education institutions. And just to quickly summarize, it was a small group of high schoolers who went to China with their school. So it was a school organized trip. And while there was a hike, a program sponsored hike of Mount Panshan there. And a small group of students who went on this hike got off trail. And unfortunately, one of the students ended up contracting tick-borne encephalitis and suffered long-term disabilities. And actually, the courts awarded that student, I think, something around $41.5 million in damages, and found that the institution did have a duty of care to warn the students about insect-borne illness. And so I think the key words that we think about as we think about our due diligence responsibilities of sending travelers out is what is reasonable and foreseeable. You know, we're going to constantly have to come back to this phrase as we think about what are the risks now with the advent of the pandemic, right, that we need to be making sure our travelers are aware of so they can make informed decisions about their participation in programs.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's dive into a couple of these big questions that's important, or topics to consider. when making these decisions. I think if we were to group these, I feel like some of them are related to the health condition in the destination country. And so I don't want to talk so much about that in this conversation, but what I do want to talk about is the category of questions that's going to actually impact our student directly. So issues related to testing, quarantining, vaccination, those sort of big three elements of this. And so I'd love for each of you to maybe walk through some of one or both, a few of those as it relates to testing, quarantining, and vaccination, and the big things we need to consider when looking at those questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll start off since you brought up the important point of vaccinations. That is one of the factors we build in, is one, just understanding what the vaccination requirements are of either the local host government or country and or your on-site partners, because some partners we are seeing are mandating, travelers be vaccinated. But just past the simple fact of knowing what these regulations are, we have some other nuanced factors to consider. So such as entry requirements. The actual ability to enter a country now could look differently based on your vaccination status. And you might end up, if you do have an unvaccinated student going abroad, for instance, they might actually have to do routine testing every few days to get proof of their status as being negative, just to be able to participate in some of the experiential learning opportunities that are built into the program. And so that speaks to another of the factors, is understanding what access to public spaces is like. I was able to travel to France last semester on a personal trip, and I had to get their equivalent of, I guess, our CDC card called the Pass Sanitaire. And you had to show that everywhere to get in cafes, to get in museums. And so you can quickly think about, on a typical maybe faculty-directed study abroad program where you're going out and about every day to do your experiential learning activities, how are you going to handle this if you have some students who are not vaccinated and have to have these different elements to gain entry? So these are all things that, again, this is why it can't be prescriptive. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. We're really going to have to take this list of questions out and answer them for each of our programs that we're sending out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've heard about travel policies by certain universities. As we know, the pandemic or COVID has been high in certain areas and low. And certain universities have continued instruction with the requirement of vaccination, but in classroom and experiential activities have continued. Well, if your leadership is supportive of international and sees global engagement as a continuum within an undergraduate experience, that vaccination, those cards, that presentation of that is similar to what that institution was doing back here, and with higher incidence of COVID infection than France and Italy. And so they determined that if you're fully vaccinated, even if you're a level 4, you should be able to go, because that was the philosophy. And that drives home that important point that your culture, your leadership's comfortableness with risk is really a critical component of these 12 different factors. But along with that, you also have to take into consideration what happens when someone tests negative. And I think that's when Magnus comes in with insurance, because you need to make sure that your insurance policies cover the myriad of evacuation and COVID hospitalization or delay in travel back that we're seeing in the field right now. And this is really, a critical component of parents and students' comfort level with traveling at this time. And so, and those policies from a legal point of view, your risk manager wants to make sure that however that expense is passed on, some institutions pick it up as part of their study abroad fees, other pass it on directly to students, but that it has the extent of the coverage that is really needed at this critical time. And so COVID testing and what happens when those positive tests come back, even if you're fully vaccinated, is a really critical component right now of re-engagement in education abroad.
For sure. And the irony that I got tested positive for COVID here 2 days ago is even more, gives more light to the show. But anyway, I'm all good. So nothing to that. But also remember that when it comes to these policies, we also see that we're actually leaving the critical pandemic phase, going into an endemic. There will be more clustered outbreaks. It will be even more. It will not be on a country level. It will be probably more on a regional level, as you mentioned there. So I think that you need to have a broader approach to what the corona or the COVID status is globally. I think that could be part of the decision making, what types of programs that you make available. There are fantastic resources that is open source out there that gives you a view of every single country in the world where you can dig in. One is openupforbusiness.com, which gives you the highlights of each country and whether it's good or no good to go. So, and on top of that, you have different types of security assistance providers and medical assistance providers that can give you really in-depth data. But once you have decided that you have this program and you know that there is cluster outbreaks or that they are pretty strict on it, you need to invest. You need to invest to get that information straight before saying go. When it comes to the insurance part of it, I would say it's much more complicated with that. And I will get back to that later because there are more bullets in those 12 points that will relate to that.
Well, I just had a meeting last Friday with a dad who his daughter wants to study abroad. And his first question to me was, how are you making decisions on if the program is going? Really, and he was talking about related to COVID. And his second question is, and what happens if it gets canceled? What's the insurance coverage? And so that's where I was going to lead into sort of our next question is, so, what are the, I guess, preparation things that might impact a student from testing to vaccination, and then the possibility of quarantining, which leads into the insurance. But then what happens if, God forbid, they get COVID in transit or in country, and they do have to quarantine or delay their participation or cancel their participation? I'm curious, Kyle, what has been your approach, especially since you're in the thick of this too, from an administrative level, from the insurance side, and then Magnus, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to select a coverage that's going to not break the bank, but also give the peace of mind and the actual coverage that is necessary in these types of situations. So Kyle?
Yeah, well, first, Brooke, I want to start, I think, with your question about kind of the preparatory part, or maybe the student advising experience of this pandemic so far, because point blank, it's just been messy. I have no other way to put it. It's just been a big mess. And some of the ways we're seeing this play out with students and how it's impacting their experiences, how do you help a student who's trying to get their classes that they need to stay at, on progress for their degree program in order, when you aren't sure that the program they're interested in going on is going to be a possibility. In context, currently at my institution, we're unfortunately still tied to the Department of State advisory levels, being a large public institution without a dedicated risk manager. And so I'm going to be using this framework, as one way to hopefully advocate for us to take a more nuanced approach. But in absence of that, it really derails the student's ability to plan effectively, which I know in our field has been such a linchpin of what we've been trying to tell students as they consider study abroad. We tell them, think about this early. We tell them, meet with your academic advisors. So they do all that just to have the rug potentially pulled out from under them a month or so before they're set to leave. So it's meant for some really tough conversations on our campus. Now, unfortunately, we've only sent very, very small numbers of students out so far, so I don't have a lot of real world experience to draw upon in terms of what the realities of that looks like, although I've been talking with a lot of colleagues in the area who have been. But I do think about how we had to change our pre-departure orientation to now talk about all of these things. And from an administrative point of view, if you're a school like me who has over 200 programs in over 55 countries around the world, how then do you scale that level of information in a way that gets the students the level of detail that they actually need to make those informed decisions, to understand if they're comfortable taking the financial risks in many cases of moving forward with the program. Thankfully, or think technology in our field is starting to help us grapple with that. And so I guess I'll pause there to what other thoughts.
Well, and that brought to my mind, and maybe Magnus, you could touch on this. I'm going rogue. This was not a prepared topic. So one of the things that made me think of is, how do we scale our ability to advise in a thoughtful and meaningful and duty of care perspective, our advising of students, especially if I'm not an expert on every country in South America and their COVID situation. I'm not an expert on their security situation either. So I think, this is not a new challenge necessarily, but it has been exacerbated by COVID for sure. But I'm curious if this leads an opportunity perhaps for insurance partners to support our offices where they can be our hotline, to be the authority on the health or security situation in a destination, where they can sort of say, this is what's happening as of March 2nd, 2022, and this is what you need to know. Sorry, not to put all the work on you Magnus, and your team, but I felt like that would be a really wonderful opportunity to partner, to say, okay, we need help because I can't scale my 2-person office beyond what our capacity really is. So
that is great, because remember that if you look at it, and I mean, technology is fantastic. You can do so much with technology, because you can actually draw in all the resources you need in order to make informed decisions, right? And if you look at this field, we've been big providers of technology for the insurance companies, right? And if you look at duty of care and how it has evolved, it was primarily for those business travelers out there. It was for travel insurance and not student insurances and other types of insurances. So that is something that's actually evolved later as we went by. So for example, we have one case here with Chubb, and they have, I mean, it's thousands of companies where they need to know where people are actually going and they are moving around. And what we did was, in the beginning of the COVID crisis, we created something called a COVID exposure tracker, because we knew where every single person, where they have been, where they have planned to go, but also where they were at the moment. And then we could start combining this data. And when COVID came to Europe 2 years ago, then we could see that when we launched that one, 6% of all the Chubb people using their insurance, they had been in a risk area with a certain number of people caught COVID. So our recommendation for them was, you need to get them home. You need to abort those travels to those risk areas. You need to put them in quarantine. All of that information was available. So the scary thing was, I remember we came up with the idea on a Monday, launched it on Thursday. So we've been hacking all night, basically. And then did this with Chubb on Thursday. And it was 6% of the total impact of these thousands of companies. The day after, on Friday, it was 8%. That was how fast COVID spread here in Europe 2 years back. It was absolutely insane. But what we did was pretty much just gathering data sources, right? These are the reported COVID cases. And here we have data of all the book trips, of all the locations of people where they are right now, and also where they have been. So the customers could make appropriate decisions to maybe abort, or to maybe put people in quarantine, etc. So technology is just great.
Yeah, and
sorry, Brooke, I wanted to say, as a dad whose 2 daughters just put in their applications to study abroad yesterday, the important piece here is those partners overseas, whether or not you're a small office utilizing third-party providers, or you believe on that direct relationship. They both apply to exchange partners for Marquette University. Those partners are a critical linchpin to assure parents, internal stakeholders, because their protocols that they are executing on the ground there will apply to your student, because they're integrated within their systems. And I think that is a really important safety the trusted partners, that relationship, knowing those international officers or working with your third-party providers and being assured of what are the parameters and provisions in place. Partners can assure any dad, any mom that their child is going to be taken care of 3,000 miles away.
Absolutely. I have commentary on that, but we're almost out of time. And so I don't want to keep people much longer than our 30 minutes that we have here. I think it's always interesting how there, on one hand, in our roles as international educators, is we want to provide information and assurance and as much information and data to help students and parents make very informed decisions and feel in the loop, I guess, on the process. On the other side, I've also had conversations with key stakeholders on my own campus about, well, we don't want to put too much information out there. And the subtext of that to me is that because we don't want to be held accountable if we put that out there. And so I would love, Terrence, your thoughts on that, because I'm kind of in this like internal struggle right now of like, I want to put the whole framework right out on the website. It says, this is how we're making decisions. But I also am having conversations where I was like, oh, maybe we need to just ratchet that back and just say, we are looking into it. What are your thoughts, Terrence?
Yeah, I think, Brooke, your instinct is the one I would go with. The more information and the transparency out there assures internal and external stakeholders. There's nothing to be hidden here. We all know of what that challenge is and what it looks like and the parameters of that risk. We just want to make sure that the information that is being utilized is transparent and open. So I always fall, especially in orientations and those type of exercises, to be as transparent with the information as possible.
All right, I have it recorded here, so I'm just going to send it to the powers that be, and I'll be like, hey, I asked somebody, he knows what he's talking about. All right. So as we wrap this conversation up, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure our audience is too. So if anybody's watching and has any questions or their own comments and commentary about this conversation, we'd love to hear it. But as we exit this conversation, this can be kind of a bummer, right? Like this whole conversation is a little bit of a bummer. Like you mentioned, Kyle, it's like, it's just been a disarray of a process, obviously, over the last 2 years. Do you have any words of encouragement for your colleagues out there who are struggling with this process or just having a hard time moving forward with these types of decisions?
For me, the biggest words of encouragement I have is that we're not in this alone, you know, as cliche as it sounds. And talking with colleagues at many different types of institutions, one thing is clear, we're all figuring this out as we go. So be kind to yourself and reach out. You know, that's the way I've been navigating this is, you know, what are other schools doing? We started a group here in Chicago for education abroad professionals and a Google folder where we could all share the resources we were developing. So lean into that, because I think we all know and celebrate about our field is that we look out for one another, and you know, we're not necessarily competitive and competing against one another. We want to see each other succeed. And then the last thing I'd say on this is, you know, COVID-19 has been called the great disruptor, but not all of that disruption has to be negative. And I actually am excited to think about what this could mean long-term for the field. We've already seen some new modalities, you know, online global learning is taking off, and just what this could do in ways that we still can't even imagine. I think there's some exciting prospects on the horizon.
Yeah, I just see Susan Sean put in, you know, that loneliness of being in a one-person office. And Susie, we know that pain of where do you go? How do you reach out? I think, you know, the reemergence of the conferences, AIEA met last week, and to see 400 international educators grappling at the conference with these key issues, even if you're a one-person office, the forum has that virtual opportunity, even if you can't go to Chicago. No, you're not alone. We're a community here. There's nothing that we cannot share or be there for. And so really do want to offer that, because the loneliness and the vulnerability and feeling like you're the only person trying to encourage this mobility at this time is isolating. and you need that support. Take good care of yourself, as Kyle says.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you both so much for that. Magnus, do you have any words of encouragement on the insurance side if people are struggling with that process right now?
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, the great disruptor, and it brought a lot of uncertainty. But also remember, after something really, really big had an impact, there will start coming more, from the governments and from authorities. They will start producing material as well as you do. And also we have a joint community. There is so many open sources that could be used as well. So there is things happening, but right now it will take some time to get it all in place. So unfortunately, a bit uncertainty, and we are here to start helping out. Guys like you at Gateway. I mean, that is what this is for. So fantastic.
And that's what I was going to say. I have no skin in this game, by the way, when I say this, but what I really love about what Gateway is doing is creating this repository of resources that almost for the most part, I think, are purely for free for people in the field to take advantage of. I know that there was a big project around duty of care, for instance. I know Kyle and Terrence are going to be working on putting these questions together in a flashier, fancier way soon too. That'll be out there as well for people to utilize as a resource. And so, yeah, lean on Gateway, lean on our professional organizations, lean on your colleagues, like phone me, I'm phone a friend and just say, oh my God, I'm so frustrated, because we all are. And hopefully we can help steer each other down the right path. So thank you all so much for this great conversation. And I'm sorry it's only 30 minutes and we can't keep going with this because I'm sure we could really get into this. Kyle says, lean into the ambiguity. Amen, brother. Yes, it's like, okay, we're all in this murky land together for sure. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, this is the Gateway Spotlight series. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, and join us again on the third Wednesday of the month for another roundtable conversation on another spicy topic in international education. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.